go.
These are on?
Yeah.
Cool. Good evening. Hello. Look at all this fancy equipment we've got going. Did you know we're live streaming tonight as well? If you didn't know, tell your friends. If they haven't come down tonight, they can just sit at home and get on YouTube. And we just put a tweet out on the Melbourne General Assembly Twitter, so if you don't know where the link is, you can go there. But welcome. Welcome down to the Docklands. It's good to have you all here tonight, and thank you for making the effort to come that extra mile down to the bottom end of Burke Street. My name's Emma. I'm from General Assembly in Melbourne. Really excited to be working with Tim and George from Pause Festival. We collaborated this year on a side event for their festival that they ran back in February. The theme was Pure, but they've moved on to Discover, which is probably something we're going to discover tonight. Just a little bit about myself. So I run the events and marketing at General Assembly in Melbourne. If you haven't heard of General Assembly, we're a global education provider. We teach classes, workshops, courses, part-time and full-time across design, business and tech. So those are our three main umbrellas, and under that we might have digital marketing or product management, visual design, user experience design, and web development. You can become a full-stack web developer in one of our full-time courses. So yeah, come and say hi to me at the end if you want to talk about partnerships or getting involved with some of our events, or if you want to come and check out our classes and workshops, you can speak to me. But our campus is also on Queen Street in the city, so come down and say hi there if you can. I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to hand over to Tim, who's from Pause Festival, and he'll do his own thing. So thanks for coming. Cool.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks very much. Lovely stuff. Okay, so hopefully a lot of people here know what Pause Festival is, and hopefully you've been to our festival and our events before. But for those that don't, thanks for being here. Pause Fest is the premier creative tech conference and festival for the Asia Pacific, and it's a catalyst for innovation, and it is a uniter of industries. That's basically what we're trying to do. And you'll notice the disparate sort of people that we have included here today is that idea. We're all dealing with technology, we're all dealing with innovation, we're all dealing with creativity, but we're all doing it in different ways. So we're very interested in the connections of how different people work together and the things that we can learn and build with each other's help. So that's essentially it. Pause is having another big year as usual. We've just got our expressions of interest open at the moment. If you guys haven't seen that, jump onto the website pausefest.com.au. If you have an idea, a product, if you would like to talk, if you want to get involved in some way, pitch your own event, there's dozens of ways to get involved. Just jump on there and have a look. We've got 2 more weeks for that to go. So please present us an idea. Most of the time they get up. We'd love to work with you. Again, it's all about community. We'd love to see it. What else is happening? So February each year is when the festival happens. This is the date for the next one. Put it in the diaries. It's going to be a big one. There's a few big names that are already locked in. We can't say anything about them just yet. George might say something else at the end. And essentially that's where we're going. I'll just pause while we've got some latecomers. And we can afford that's fine. But yeah, Sophie will talk a little bit more about this, but as our aim of the festival is for everybody to unite, please stick around at the end of this event. We would love to have some networking, meet some new people, get some new contacts, grab a few business cards. There's plenty of lovely beverages supplied by GA and Pause out there to go. So, you know, we'd love to have a chat and we'd love to meet you. So after all that, can I please welcome Sophie Travers, who is the International Development Manager for the Australia Council of the Arts, and she will introduce a little bit about tonight's panel. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Emma. Thanks, George, for inviting me. I'm your moderator tonight, so I'm not planning to say a great deal. My job is to keep things rolling, fill any awkward gaps, take your questions at the end. Questions, not too many statements, and generally just keep the energy up as we go along on this evening. So we're aiming for finishing for some drinks around 7:30. We're going to just run through all the presentations one after the other. So please do keep your questions. Think of some questions as you're going along and keep those for the end when we'll have about a half-an-hour chat with you. Very important that you talk to us and contribute to tonight to make it a success. As Tim says, we've got a very diverse panel from a whole range of different sectors talking about the future in their form as they see it, picking up on key trends, opportunities, challenges. So hopefully there's something in there that will spark some commentary from you. I'm sure you've all got quite a lot to contribute yourselves. I'm glad to see many of you have brought in a glass of wine, so nice and relaxed. Enjoy the presentations, and without further ado, we'll start with Felicity. So our panel tonight is 4 speakers. We will start with Felicity Ford, who is from the Future Business Council of Australia. Felicity is one of the co-founders and she's the operations director. Felicity will hand over to Jeremy Wartsman, who's from the Jackie Winter Group. Jeremy is also a founder and the director of the Jackie Winter Group. They're one of Australia's leading creative agencies. Jeremy will hand over to Dr. Kim Vinks, another Kim, director of the Deakin Motion Lab at Deakin University. And finally, we'll finish with David Anderson, who's at the Arts Centre in Melbourne. David is the Programme Manager of Music and Performing Arts. So we will crack through with the presentations. Each one's between 5 and 10 minutes, but we'll have considerable time at the end for questions. So Felicity.
Thank you. So my name's Felicity Ford. I'm co-founder and operations director of the Future Business Council. And what the Future Business Council is, it's a new member-based advocacy organisation, and we're advocating for the next generation of business. Now, how we see the next generation of business is businesses that are resilient, they're sustainable, and they're long-sighted. And beyond this, we have many different founding members. Some of them are the likes of Airbnb, Intrepid Travel, Australian Ethical, and Fair Trade. Now, in regards to this, what we're trying to do is set the vision for the next 50 years in business. But no one here tonight came to listen to me talk about the Future Business Council, so I'll go on to what's next. Now, through the past few weeks, I've been having a chat with people in the arts and design industry. And a few structural challenges came out that were very, very interesting. The first one is lower barriers to entry. And what we mean by lower barriers to entry is along the lines of this. If you're looking at a graphic designer, what were they doing 40 years ago? Well, 40 years ago within the graphic design industry, you were still looking at drawing, you were looking at printing. Then came in the Adobe suite, which had a knowledge of skills with Illustrator, Photoshop. And nowadays, with technology, what you've moved into is this ability to use people like me to use things like Canva, which I made this presentation on. And this lower barrier to entry is meaning that people that have no graphic design ability, which I'm fairly happy to say, that they can use these programs, which means that no longer do they need to have a graphic designer. On the other side, you've got these economic challenges. You've got a macroeconomic challenge and a microeconomic challenge. And this macroeconomic challenge within the arts community itself is looking at tightening of budgets. So a lot of the arts community that I spoke about, they were saying they're NGOs and they're either philanthropically funded or they're government funded. And the problem they're seeing is when the economy tightens, they're the first to lose their funding. And there's many different reasons beyond this. One of the ones that stuck out, which I don't know if it's the main reason, but was the interesting of the measurement of arts versus something like providing meals to a homeless shelter, which is very easy to measure versus the impact that arts and culture has. Another smaller economic challenge is within companies and organisations. Now, if you've got, say, Bob the accountant and Joe the designer, and you're not a design-based industry, but you need, you use that semi-watt. If things are tough, what's the first to go? Unfortunately, it's the designer, because structurally you need that accountant and that very strict type of business. But I think that's enough of glass half empty. We'll move on to the half full, because through these structural challenges, we have a lot of opportunities. Now, moving back to Canva, which I was discussing just before, that's creating lower barriers to entry. What technology is also allowing for is this amazing global integration. So these design firms are now enabling themselves to actually have increased reach and actually be based in Australia, but having global reach across the world. They've got more viewers of what they do, and they're actually able to do jobs from across the world. This is also interesting in a communications base because they can have IP and skilled-based employees here, but for the lower level jobs, they can actually use people in the Philippines or around in India to do these other things which enable them yet again to employ people within Australia. So you've got these new economies coming out. And then another really interesting opportunity that came out was the autonomisation of the workforce. Now, what we mean by the autonomisation of the workforce is take a Gen Yer. Let's take a Gen Y that's been working in corporate. Specifically, let's say a big bank. If you're a banker and you've been working there for, let's say, 10 years, everything you do is a systematic approach. You get a phone call from your client, step 1, you use system 1. Step 2, you use system 2. And if system 3 doesn't work, well, you call IT. Whereas, so what you've got now is this availability and space within these large corporates to bringing these design thinkers in. And there's this thing bubbling below the surface of these corporates needing creative types to come in and think beyond this systematic approach that this autonomisation of the workforce holds. So opportunities are really, really interesting. All these opportunities that are coming out of technology is you've got this knowledge base of skills. And then on the other side of things, you've got this new way, an innovative way of coming into these areas that you would have never, ever used before. So there's a few case studies. An interesting one, which everyone here would know about, is Mona. Mona is a very big success story in the arts industry from a business space. I look at it as Jack Walsh, he's a professional gambler and a mathematician. And on the back of that, the Tasmanian economy has the highest level of unemployment in Australia. It also has consumptive income per capita in Australia. And with this comes a lower culture that arts brings. So Jack Welch had this crazy idea of bringing arts. Now, what he's enabled is a new economy of tourism. And this tourism has actually impacted not only artists in Australia, but also its cultural expression within the greater Australia, because it's the #1 tourist destination in Australia. So what it's allowed is for people like me who aren't in the arts and design industry is to understand how important culturally arts is within the greater community. Another very, very interesting one was in the advocacy space and the use of new business supporting artists. Now, Climb Art is a really, really interesting one. They're taking the really emotive challenge of advocating for climate change, and they're taking artists, and they're enabling installations that allow the user to experience climate change in their own version and how they feel about it without the media whitewash or the political rhetoric. Well, of course, it's got the artist rhetoric on it, but in terms of compared to what we're normally seeing, it's a very, very interesting way. So what I wanted to leave everyone with tonight was a bit of a take-home. And what I would like you guys to all do is think of 3 knowledge-based skills that you have, things that you would like to see yourself use within this. Because what we're seeing is jobs aren't going to be around for time due to technology change. And then think of 3 areas that you've never ever thought yourself to be actually working in. 3 really strange areas. It could be an oil and gas miner or engineer. And then I want you to sit down and collaborate and innovate and think of how you could actually draw those knowledge-based skills into that area, make it better. Because what it's going to take, I believe, for the arts and design industry is some innovative and creative thinking inside large business to actually have a sustainable outcome for Australia, but also a tangible outcome for artists to do what they love. And now I'll hand it to me.
Thank you very much. Okay, that was very confident in tone. I don't think I can match that. I was very inspired by that. Excellent work. In 1989, this book came out, and it quickly became the most important publication in my life. Actually, no, the second most important publication. Number one was a Penthouse magazine that me and my friend found buried in a local park, and we continued to excavate it and rebury it every day after school until it basically just turned to, like, tea leaves. Apart from, well, as you can see, walking televisions and something happening in the pool, which I'm not too sure what's going on, the book's premise was it made concrete predictions with dates and estimated prices of 275 consumer products that would be on shelves by the year 2000. It was based on interviews with the people who were working on these products, and they were all more or less wrong, but that didn't stop me from fantasizing about some of my particularly amazing upcoming inventions from my favorite section called Future Games, which included some of these perlers, like uphill skiing, oversized golf, wind weapons, no idea what that was, five-bladed boomerangs, and of course robot horse racing. Now, in 2007, someone found this book, and they actually wrote reviews of each of these predictions, and it's really fantastic. And the book actually came out with a sequel called More Future Stuff, and it's fantastic. It's like you can get it for $2 on Amazon. So as great as this book is, it's also a bit of a cautionary tale in terms of listening to people who say they can predict the future, especially me, to not get too excited because, like everyone else who works in this space and trying to plan for the future, we have no idea what we're doing and just pretending to make it up as we go along. So speaking of which, my name's Jeremy Wartzman. I'm the director of the Jackie Winter Group. We're a creative production company representing Australia's finest commercial artists, working in mediums from illustration to photography to animation and live activations. If you want to know about us, that's our kind of website with all of our details. Whoa, too fast. Our clients are primary Australian advertising agencies, and while we're not solving the most pressing issues facing our future generations, we're at least trying to make it a better looking place, or so I tell myself when I try to sleep at night. In advertising, the longest term future that we can often plan for is the end of the day, and sometimes that's even too hard to forecast. So that said, we are in the fortunate position where we have actual data from thousands of commercial artwork commissions over the past 8 years, and from that data and experience, we can definitely see trends. And what I've done for you this evening is I picked 5 of the most important emerging trends that I think are most important to me and my business to share with you this evening. Now, I like to reference links a lot, so tomorrow morning I'll put all these links on our Twitter feed, so you don't have to write anything down like the future stuff one. That'll be in there as well. So my first point, the digital future is going to rely a lot more on these digits, and animated GIFs aren't going anywhere. One of my favorite daily rituals at night is what I do is I floss and I brush listening to the NPR One app. Has anyone listened to that at all? It's basically it's an amazing app, and like they do 3-minute news recaps every hour. And it brings up random stories, and while I was preparing for the talk, a story on this article kind of came up, and the headline is "Humans are tech's next big thing, and that could be risky." And even just last night, as I was going over this, venereal disease and self-experimentation. I don't know what that is, but I was reading the Facebook apparently building a human-powered personal assistant. I didn't see that. I don't know why that was there. But yeah, Facebook's building this kind of human-powered assistant, and the bottom line with these stories that I found really interesting is that there's this growing trend in companies such as Apple, Twitter, and LinkedIn to hire actual writers, editors, human beings to staff their growing news and content applications. So they've realized that, okay, algorithms and AI are getting us this far and it has a great future, but there's definitely a near-term shift happening in putting people back into the equation in a very real way. And that's what we do at Jackie Winter every day. It's very low-tech, lots of emails, lots of phone calls, lots of humanity in there. And on the creative side of things, I think this definitely integrates with how we see, with tech kind of being integrated more and more into our daily lives, I think we're definitely seeing a lot more briefs coming through that are seeking more authentic offline experiences, both in our personal and professional lives. And it's been present over the last 5 or so years, especially across advertising and creative industries, with the trend of utilizing more tactile techniques such as hand lettering, papercraft, DIY culture. But I think that's going to even push further into authenticity as perhaps we're reaching the peak of a very style-driven, curated, and manufactured online life. Perhaps over the next 12 months, especially more transient mediums like Snapchat and more offline experience-based campaigns will take precedent. And that brings me to my second point is that doesn't mean you shouldn't start preparing for your robot hand. So another daily ritual that I like to do before I go to bed, I think of all the horrible decisions I've made in my life, that just repeat over and over. Like the time I got rejected for a dishwashing job at, what was that place in the city that has the upstairs? Anyway, that was really sad. I think about that. I think about if I bought real estate in 2001, and I think about this when Banksy came to Sydney for Semi-Permanent in 2003. This was an exhibition that he did. And over in the gift store, they had all these kind of rolls of original Banksy screen prints selling for $50. But I thought, it's just not worth it. And yeah, I think about that a lot. But one of my favorite things is thinking about how there are these kind of opportunities here now in tech that are kind of very real, and they're there kind of every day. So advertising won't be going away anytime soon. However, new venues, new methods are rapidly being deployed. And for the astute creative, there's lots of blank space where you can effectively lay your claim into a new area. The biggest venue we're seeing at the moment is in motion graphics. We see photographers evolving to DOPs, illustrators evolving to animators and working on animation. There are more screens than ever, and those screens need content. So whether you're developing for Oculus Rift, you're a 3D artist who can operate a 3D printer, a lighting designer working at projection mapping, a designer-developer combo. I mean, unlike how things were when we were at the fringes of these technologies, these tools are actually kind of ready for prime time now, and they're just there, waiting to be picked up. My third point, 1,000 true fans can make for a sustainable career in the arts. And this is one of my favorite points. It's based on a blog post by a writer named Kevin Kelly, who's the founding executive editor of Wired. Does some great writing on the internet. And one of my favorite pieces is called 1,000 True Fans, which makes the following assertion. A creator such as an artist, musician, photographer, craftsperson, performer, animator, designer, video maker, or author, in other words, anyone producing works of art, needs only to acquire 1,000 true fans to make a living. He goes on to say, a true fan is defined as someone who will purchase anything and everything you produce. They will drive 200 miles to see you sing. They will buy the super deluxe reissued high box set of your stuff, even though they have the low-res version. They have a Google alert for your name. They bookmark the eBay page where your out-of-print editions show up. They come to your openings. They have you sign their copies. They buy the T-shirt and the mug and the hat. They can't wait till you issue your next work. They are true fans. Now, there's a lot of writing and comment and kind of, whoops, no, cat gif comes next. Sorry. There's a lot of writing and comment on his original post, but we're definitely seeing an emergence in the individual creative as a brand. Now, I know this idea makes some people vomit in their mouth slightly. It makes me cringe sometimes as well, but it's definitely the way that things are going. And we as an agency are really interested in seeing how a brand like that develops, especially through social media. So as social media is becoming more fragmented, and just as there are opportunities to stake a claim at a particular creative tool, there's never been a better time as well to double down on a particular medium that suits your practice well to start building towards that base of 1,000 true fans. At the same time, we think it's really important to get on as many platforms as you can and to really know how people find your work and how to properly leverage those platforms. Editorial art directors might be looking at Behance, but they're probably not following your Pinterest board. These tools give us an almost surgical precision to target our market if we know how to use them right. Now you can get the cat gif. Stock imagery and crowdsourced design will not be the death of creativity. Now, you can design your logo on Squarespace for free. You can get a royalty photo for $1. You get a brochure designed for $5. The Noun project is coming for illustrators' jobs, and everyone who owns an iPhone is now a professional photographer. Now, while some of these things I think can seem a bit scary, I actually don't feel threatened by them at all. If anything, I think it shows me that the value of art and design is finally gaining a broader appreciation in the world, especially in terms of how it can drive business. Less than a decade ago, the word design echoed an elite subculture, but in another decade, it will be the chief design officers running the show in big businesses rather than CEOs. So again, no time to prepare like the present. I know it might seem like the opposite in many ways, but I think the fact that this space has seen so much growth is because of this. I think we're definitely approaching, in some ways, the nexus where the quality of work produced by many of these new venues will be on par with what is created through the traditional commissioning process. Therefore, I think it's even more important to look at these new technologies and how you can evolve your practice to stay ahead of that curve. My final point is cash is no longer king. And speaking of value, I think this is one of the biggest changes is happening in terms of how we get paid as creatives. And for me, in my business, this has been one of my biggest professional crusades in the last few years. And I think if the internet's done anything good, it's been drawing attention to the financial lives of freelancers and how that economy works. I thought it was really interesting the past few weeks to read about the whole Taylor Swift photography scandal, which came off the back of her kind of writing that open letter to Apple about their kind of licensing terms for Apple Music. And I just think that's a really great, well, it's a bigger example of something in terms of how we struggle to getting fair compensation for our artists and our clients. And now licensing is just one way that we work with value-based pricing, but we're definitely seeing emerging trends, especially with content studios and design studios in terms of working for equity. And the two examples I like to point out, this is Red Antler. They're the creative studio that works with Casper mattresses in the States. They just did a great campaign that rolled out in the States over there. But the way that they work with startups is by actually working for equity. And there's another studio called Sandwich Videos. And I love their website. I'll put this link up. It just kind of shows the 3 ways that they work with different types of business and how kind of equity kind of figures into that. So we're definitely seeing this emerging of value-based pricing working in a different way. And finally, a joke that's not going to work. Jude Law sex robots is going to be the biggest thing in the future. But nobody remembers the movie AI, where Jude Law was a gigolo, a robot named Gigolo Joe. And I knew nobody would find this funny, but I didn't care. I stand by this joke. I think it's really good. And AI was a really great movie anyway. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I'll put these links up tomorrow. Thanks again for having me. Sorry for going a bit long. And I'm going to pass over to the next speaker now. Thank you.
Hi, I'm not quite sure how I follow that joke, but I will give it a go. My name's Kim Vence. I'm the director of Deakin Motion Lab, which is at Deakin University in Burwood, and I'm going to talk in a slightly different realm because I'm a researcher. I'm an artist and a researcher, so what our group does is put creative practices, arts projects to work solving problems and looking at, I guess, what we imagine the future could be, and particularly in relation to movement-based work. So what I look forward to is the day when the Rolls-Royce motion capture system that we have in our studio, and that day is like about tomorrow, is available, so that people can DIY their own motion capture. And we're almost there, actually, not very far away from that. So the lab, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background which will make sense in a moment, but we do commercial motion capture, that's our base. We do movement performance research, so interested in how movement and technology intersect, so what happens at that point, aesthetically but also culturally, technologically, what are the possibilities that come out of that. Dance and technology, I'm a choreographer, so that's very dear to my heart, and many of us come out of dance at the lab. And teaching, of course, as we're a university centre. We were established in 2006, so next year is our 10th anniversary. And we do a lot of work with a lot of companies externally, unusually for a university research group, I think, at least the kinds of research groups that are evolving in the arts, and about 50% of our is research funded, traditional Australian Research Council, those sorts of things, and about 50% is working with all exciting people that we can find in the world to work with. Performance technology innovation is kind of a key driver because it's all about how movement and technical systems, technology systems, algorithms, hardware interact. Research and development for the arts is what we see as our core role. And I think one of the things I wanted to say tonight is that I think it's really really critical that we take a look at research and development. And when I talk about the arts, I think I'm leaning more towards the performing arts. In industries such as mining, defence, the hard sciences, health, large-scale research and development hubs are really common in universities, and partnerships between those hubs and major industry or all kinds of industry are really the engine that drives innovation. And in the arts, we have never really had that structure. Innovation, of course, comes in every artist's work. It's the job of every individual artist to innovate, and that is how research is driven. Small R research, if you like, widely distributed across the arts. But my question is, why do we not have the capacity and the infrastructure and the scalability that I see as a researcher in other areas? So that's, I think, one of the key missions of Motion Lab is to start to kind of step into that, be able to start to make available through partnerships, through joint projects, some of the sort of university scale infrastructure that can do some of the blue sky research, because when you're making a work, you're making a work. And you are doing blue sky research, of course, but you've also probably got an exhibition date or you've got a performance coming up, and at the end of the day it's got to work and you've got to do that. And I see this also working with a lot of game development companies, with all of our motion capture clients. There isn't time often in a working business to kind of follow just some thought that may or may not come to fruition in something saleable and scalable. So I see that as the role of the research and development hubs and really of research centres to kind of be able to work through some of those ideas, and then so that when we do come to work with people in industry, in performing arts companies, in all kinds of industries, we've actually got that development to bring to the work. So just to give you an idea of what motion capture is and my way of articulating the connection between body So that was a project that we did motion capture for. You probably never look at that ad in the same way again, with Alt VFX in Brisbane, a really fun project. The sausage dog has just the right length leg to make to make a loaf of bread. And kinds of I think this is going to play. Let me see. There we go. So, these kinds of ways of linking the body and technology are I think, key to all kinds of new futures that we can see. This is something else that we did. This is, I'm not going to show you all of this. This is Wagner in 8 minutes. This is actually 3D scenography for Wagner's The Flying Dutchman that we did with Victorian Opera. This is, the audience is wearing stereo glasses. That sea looks enormous, and here comes the Dutchman ship. So I guess one of the things that that the connection with movement makes me think about is what is the visuality of the future when our imaginations and visual sensibilities are very conditioned by a sort of cinematic approach. What does that mean when you go to the theatre and you don't see that? So this was an experiment with Victorian Opera to see what it would be like to put that kind of very vast grandeur going as over the top as we could with this opera. And in fact, it worked brilliantly. And interestingly enough, we were a bit worried about this, that's the sun going down fast. This is an 8-minute précis of the whole thing. This is actually a game engine, and we actually built the whole fjord that the opera takes place in. So, when the ship needs to drive down the fjord, we follow it around the world. So it's a completely sort of different way of making scenography. Really visually powerful. I think it really fit the opera context really well, and interestingly enough, the most traditional of opera fans loved it. So it wasn't a sense that people were worried about putting their stereo glasses on or anything like that. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because it does go for a little while. This is another, let's turn this down a little bit, just another idea about the future of attention in the theatre. So this was also done in stereo, so there were dancers in front of this kind of vast stereo environment, but actually looking quite human and fragile in front of it. So rather than trying to meld with a sort of a futuristic thing, placing them in front of it. And what you're seeing there are these this iPad app that we made that just gives this kind of gentle text and different kinds of information into the performance. So that was an experiment in attention in the theatre. What is it like to browse? And we spent a lot of time sort of calibrating what that pacing is between looking at somebody dancing and somebody information here, which you can choose to ignore or not. And I think that this was another experiment in what is the future. How can you get meta information into the theatre without upsetting the whole dynamic of the theatre, which is to come and watch? And it does actually completely disconnect the kind of cohesion of the art form, but I find that exciting. I want to try more of that. And this last example is taking movement, the future of bodies in performance, and taking movement into a robot. This is motion capture movement. This is actually John's work, who's sitting right here. And this is an extension of an artificial intelligence 3D avatar that John has made. And this is the first step, taking it into a robotic thing. And this is actually motion capture movement. So that's, oh, stop. Well, that's all right because I can't talk for too long. So the concept there is actually to make is all about how that interface works and what the communication can be with these technologies, which I think is the key question. It's one thing to build them, it's another thing to know what to do with them. And this is the first step towards an artificial intelligence robot that will be able to dance with a person. And if they can dance with a person, then presumably they can communicate in any other way. So I guess that that really is a summary of some of the things that I find interesting, but in general, thinking more that movement is, we don't know where it's going to go, so we really need to be doing this work in thinking about what the possibilities are of the technology as well as building them. And that's all I have to say. I'll pass over to David now.
Hi, I'm David Anderson and I'm a Luddite. I'm just going to play you a little slide which kind of hopefully illustrates a very literal interpretation of the subject matter. Keep pushing. So my very literal interpretation of the subject matter is I was emailed by a sound artist called Tamara Salwick, who had kind of intrigued me with this beautiful piece about death, well, really remembering the departed. And she was working with a contemporary musician that I really admire called Paddy Mann. She said, we want to do a live cross to Aarhus Festival and create an improvisation piece. This is my literal interpretation of what the future in performing arts might look at. But then I realised this was last year. Then I remembered this little anecdote I had with John Cale's people about a piece. He's the cello player who was originally in the Velvet Underground. I think he's in his 70s, and they were approaching me about working on a piece with drones, the helicopter things, flying around inside the concert hall, dressed in costumes, with guitars going through them and stuff, and that was last year too. So I got kind of a bit lost with this subject. I got really nervous. But what I thought was that this idea of doing an improvised piece across the globe, I think might serve to illustrate a few things that I'm kind of hopeful will be what the future holds for us. I think our digital future enables more participation and collaboration. I think Felicity talked about that easier entry point. I can play around with creating stuff now, and I think that's really important because it engenders a real love and involvement in it. I think things like Skype, it's been incredible for creative conversations, because when you're on the phone, you don't know whether your idea is shit, because you can't on the other end rolling their eyes. I think that having these creative conversations and being able to do that in real time engenders trust, and I think it makes for really productive collaboration. And I think the way I'm talking with people all over the place all the time about ideas that were probably inconceivable, say 2 or 3 years ago. We've already heard about the way technology facilitates and enhances performance. But then, as I kept looking at that video, I kept coming back to that little cutaway that showed the audience, and in this sort of kind of enhanced lifestyle that we live at, where we've got all of this, you know, all the social media applications, we keep hearing about 24-hour news cycles, become really imperative on people in my industry to kind of enable people time to reflect. I think the performing arts industry has and will continue to embrace digital technology, but maybe in a way that's almost applied as an antidote to it. So for us, I think the digital future has to be something that enhances this idea of the collective experience. I can see all those people in here listening intently. They've got up, they've come to this place, they're sitting in this environment, and they've made a commitment. Not saying anything against the people that are at home, that's all cool, but what I'm trying to do is, I suppose, caution or get people to refocus on that idea of the collective experience and how powerful it is, the idea of standing in an audience at a huge music festival and the band's just clicked and hit it is a remarkable feeling, I reckon, when you just love that act and that music's really powerful. I think that it's really important that also when we sit in rooms and we see a bit of performance art, that we've got to always connect back to that really fundamental point that we might view it differently, but there's this joy of looking around and seeing people respond to it. I mean, it's great when you're busting out laughing at some hilarious thing that's happened, and you see all the other humans in the room doing the same thing. And I also love that idea that we can sort of tune out and contemplate stuff and drift off. And one of the beautiful things about the digital future is that way, and I think Hume illustrated it, when you've got different things that you can contemplate whilst you're in a real-time performance environment that allows you to contemplate and think about things really differently. So I'm hoping that this, what we do, and it's more hoping rather than predicting, that these things are always sort of viewed as core and incredibly important. I did say earlier on, and I keep coming back to it, there's so many things that we think can enhance things, but there's also the danger of the syndrome that we call rolling a turd in glitter. I think, so, you know, we've got to go back and make sure the core and the guts of it is right and it's true. And I think I really want to say, probably in summary of all this, is that it's important that we're not alone, and I think that that future is what I hope we're all striving for, is to ensure that we maintain that collective experience. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Oh, there I am. Okay, so how long have we got? We've got half an hour, so we're going to do half an hour of conversing amongst ourselves and with you. I think those were really great presentations. I think there's lots to say there, lots in common, lots potential contradictions actually as well. So it'll be interesting to see where we settle. The lights are actually very bright, so we are going to have a roving mic for questions, so do put your hand up nice and give it a good old wave, because it's actually quite hard to see. We might kick off with a few questions just to get you warmed up. I think one of the themes that I sort of heard in everybody's presentation was that the human element. I think, David, the fact that we are all here and not at home, you know, mapping this, where we've made the effort to come out and connect, and we want to talk to each other and we want to have that human connection is really interesting, especially when we're hearing a lot about machine learning and big data and, you know, all these interventions in that. And so it was interesting to sort of pick up on, you know, your hands, your people, your, you know, need to have the live, that human connection.
It is a bit self-serving, I have to admit, though.
Because
without the live thing, we're out of a job in my area.
Yes, but the live performing arts are doing well, aren't they? There's no real, I mean, there hasn't been that drop-off in audience. If anything, you know, that thirst for experience.
I think it's cyclical, and I think that collective experience is fundamentally important. I see, for example, you can see how music festivals have evolved and some have fallen away, and I think part of that is because, you know, one of the things about human nature is that we all know that we can have a better experience 5 weeks hence, you know, and I think that collective experience of getting it right is what helps to evolve the industry, but it's also what brings it undone a lot. Because the thought of it becoming mundane demotivates people to get out on cold wintry nights in Melbourne and go and do stuff.
Yeah. What do you think, Jeremy? I was very interested in your 1,000 fans. Do you think, just for people in the room, you know, there's all that talk about how long it takes to master your art. If you had the 23 years or whatever, the 100,000, the Malcolm Gladwell number of hours, there you go. I was wishing I'd had my phone while you were talking. What is that number? What are you better spent using that time for? Are you out there looking for your 1,000 fans, or are you in your attic mastering your art?
Wait, sorry, in what context? Me personally? Or?
Just these people in the room. How would you advise them to use that 10,000 hours? I don't want to put you on the spot or anything. But you know what I mean? I'm talking about that tension to get out there amongst it, or to actually get on. That's kind of what you were saying. Before you roll something in glitter, you better make sure it's worth rolling.
So we call it polishing a turd in advertising.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's a really hard question. I mean, I think that there's my initial reaction is like, would be to kind of focus on one thing, because I think that's what's. But at the same time, I think the industry has kind of developed. It's really kind of hard to actually nurture people who are doing kind of that one thing and doing it really kind of well. I think especially the people that we work with, we're finding that everyone is kind of running 3 different businesses. Like, they work full time, and then they run a shop at night, and then they're taking a course to do this, and you have this kind of culture of, I guess, amateurism in a way, which has provided new opportunities in industry, but I think it's also had a lot of kind of negative effects. And I think, this kind of whole idea of kind of refocusing on craft and kind of getting really, really good at one thing is great. Then the industry has to kind of support that kind of a bit more, and I think that kind of support hasn't kind of come back. So I don't really know if you take those kind of 10,000 hours and you chop it up into 10 different blocks, trying to learn 10 different things, only 1/10 as good as they could be, or if you try to kind of just do that one thing. But I don't know. There's something in there that could be unpacked, I think.
Yes, there's something around the low entry point, isn't there, Felicity? That is as much a challenge as an opportunity. I think to get out there and try your hand at everything.
Yeah, I think definitely. When you're looking at that 10,000 hours, I think you could do the 10,000 hours and be as fantastic and the best person in the industry. But unless you've got your personal branding right, nowadays, due to technology, it means nothing. And I think that personal branding strategy is a really, really big piece into play with this. So, the 10,000 hours is nothing if you don't have that brand, and that brand behind who you are and what you do, and knowing that yourself. And I think that's a bigger piece behind actually having the knowledge base and the skills, is actually knowing what your brand is behind that.
I have a slightly different take on that, thinking that 10,000 hours matters, but not necessarily for what you actually spent them on. That if you spend your 10,000 hours or whatever getting good at something, it gives you a base to do something else. It gives you a confidence to do something else. Because whatever you're going to pick to do your 10,000 hours on, it's going to be the wrong thing in a few years' time. If you know what I mean.
How do you cope with that in a research context? Because the people who work with you, like John, you need to be extremely good at the thing that you're doing in order to earn that place in this lab.
Yeah.
And yet things are moving at such a pace. How do you maintain your edge?
Actually, I think by continually pushing where that edge is. So, and actually being quite flexible and fluid, but that's because the research group is around about 20 people. It's not just one person. So it's not one set of 10,000 hours we're leveraging. It's all of the different skills and the different backgrounds that people have. But probably more important for me, and this is perhaps looking at bringing people into the team, it's much more important to me to find someone who can say, I have no idea how to do that, and come back a couple of days later and be able to do it, than it is to find someone who knows their stuff inside and out but only knows how to do it that one way. But I see that as connected to how you do your 10,000 hours. If you do that the same way, with the same sort of inquiring kind of approach, then you'll do everything that way. So maybe it's more about how those abilities are built up rather than what they are.
Interesting. I was very interested in your points about attention. I think that's a very contemporary question around interference and holding attention, and it relates, I think, a little bit to this same question about focus and spreading yourself too thin or digging deep into something. What's the future of attention?
I guess I'd have to say I don't know, and that's precisely why I made that work, to really see, well, it's really, you know, sitting watching the telly with your iPad on your lap, an experience. What does happen if you take that into the theatre? And it was actually a very interesting and I think quite powerful thing to do, because it seems to polarise people. There are some people really enjoy that opportunity to kind of meander around through content, and some people just don't sort of want that. But to me, that brings up the you know, what is a good pace of information. And you know, I guess that's the thing. I don't know, but I think in the theatre it's interesting because it brings in other forms of content in a completely different way. So I think it's an interesting one. I think it'd be interesting to do that work again in 5 years' time and see if the response is the same.
Do you think things are accelerating in terms of attention? Like, do you find that people are expecting?
I think most definitely. I think, you know, probably every single person in this room is probably sitting there right now, either have checked their phone probably 5 times throughout the whole time, or tweeting, or, you know, so this concept of having to be constantly connected. On top of that, Jeremy was talking about this aesthetic nature and how it's actually going to help that design industry. And I think that our attention span is gotten, we like the aesthetic beauty of things now. And this new technology age has made our attention span shorter. So to actually gain someone's attention, it needs to be aesthetically more pleasing. And actually, we're constantly on. You know, if I'm sitting watching television, I'll be on my phone. I'll have my computer there. You know, it's a very different way of functioning to what you were functioning 20 years ago.
How about some questions? Has anybody got anything to ask the panel? Either one particular presentation? Yep, there's this lady here.
I've got the mic too. There was 2 questions here.
Yeah. Yeah, give us a good wave. It's hard to see.
My question is to Felicity. Felicity was talking about the value of arts and used tourism in Tasmania as an evidence of that value. I would argue that that's a spurious claim. We could just as easily have a wonderful shipwreck in the Gold Coast, and that could be a tourism boost. It's not the economic value to the state that you should be talking about if you're talking about the value of art. Surely it's a matter of saying, what does the performing arts give to your human condition, and how does it increase your contentment? As an example, recent studies have shown that if you live in a tree-lined street, that's worth the equivalent in your happiness and satisfaction to a $10,000 pay increase. So I'd be looking for a measure in the arts that was more of that sort, rather than saying, oh, we've increased tourism, because that can still leave the Tasmanian people basically pretty ordinary and underdeveloped, while bringing in tourist money. But it's not the same as giving a value for the performance and the value of the performing arts to your human condition.
I definitely agree with what you're saying, and in terms of the way I was taking it and looking at it is more, and this is from a business perspective and a financial perspective, and when it comes down to it, we are living in a capitalist society. So, you know, you're looking at the integration of culture and things is very, very important. But from the way I'm coming from it is I was looking at it as a new economies perspective. So if we can make money out of, and this comes up in a few people, that we don't need to make money out of it. That the process I always look at is how can we make money out of doing the right thing, and how can we build better business so that you have these positive cultural outcomes that art has always had, but you actually make money out of doing it. And this is this interesting dichotomy that we're trying to play with, and we actually don't have the answer. From my point of view, I think Mona has been very successful, and from an economic point of view, politically they can measure it, but then the outcomes and the other things you're talking about, they can also measure that. So I agree with what you're saying, but from my case study per se, I was discussing more the economic sense of it.
Can I maybe jump in here too, because I was really interested in you talking about Mona, because I've got a real connection with Mona because of Mona Foamer and Dark Mofo now. So for me, it has been an instigator of a kind of broadening of options for us to present work They've helped create an appetite, and I think what's also happened is they've helped increase participation, because even anecdotally now I hear people go, I'm going over to Tasmania. I think even in the media you're looking at, you know, there's shows on Tasmanian produce. That to me has been a really interesting case study, but even directly affecting my industry, there has been this connection, because Brian Ritchie, who curates work for Mona Foma in the performing arts area, has collaborated with us, and we're able to do much more kind of experimental work and bring out much riskier artists that we previously couldn't dream of, because it's created this other staging post and another discussion and another appetite.
Yeah. Let's take another question here, at the back, and then you.
Good evening. My question stems from Felicity. In your presentation, we spoke about the autonomization of the workforce. So this being a panel about creative injection into the everyday, any sort of tips or pointers to get perhaps more systematic leaders warming up to the idea of, you know, creative solutions to the everyday?
Become a member of the Future Business Council. Actually, this is an interesting one, and this is what we're trying to do, is how do we take new approaches, and how do we actually systematically change what's happening? Because at the moment we're seeing, this is on a broader sense than the design and arts industry, the whole economy. Australia's in a really interesting transitional place. We're going out of our resources boom and more into this service-based industry, and we actually don't quite know what we are or what we're doing. So I think there is a really big opportunity. It's the concept of how do we encourage leaders to actually go out and actually find these artistic types. And it's a really hard one. I don't know if anyone, Jeremy, this might be...
Yeah, I think look. Jeremy,
I feel like this might be the area where you guys, as an advertising firm, you're actually implementing what you do into large corporates in a different way.
Yes. Sorry. What? Can you just reconnect me with the question a bit?
I think it's around the fact that you're working with artists, and yet you're working predominantly in a business environment. So how are you managing that injection of the work of these creative people into that business context?
Well, I think that's a really tricky one. I mean, I think Australia definitely doesn't have it didn't when I kind of came, like the type of kind of training for the kind of applied arts, as I kind of call it. I mean, in terms of people who are doing creative work specifically for a brief to make financial gain. And that's kind of where my kind of interest is in terms of the overlap of art and commerce. And I think, what we tried to do is identify kind of where that gap was, because you had a lot of artists who were kind of, who were just kind of pursuing their own practice in a bit of a vacuum and not able to kind of connect. So I think, we are just kind of a natural extension of the market force that, needed to kind of connect those kind of two things together. And I think our business is just a natural result of that. And I think, if anything, more businesses like ours will continue kind of to exist, correct those situations as they kind of come up, and that's why I think Australia is in a very kind of unique position in terms of where that kind of developed, because it is so geographically kind of disconnected. So I think as we're able to kind of start making kind of more of these kind of physical and intellectual and cultural kind of new businesses and new kind of niches will continue to evolve like they are now. That's kind of more in terms of kind of what our origin is, and we're kind of very reactive in terms of how we have kind of evolved our business to meet those needs. I don't know if I'm saying anything, but that's kind of more personal to our business.
And systemically, if you're trying to shift into this large corporate space, I think thinking about left of field things like consultancies, which most artists, I know Deloitte, for example, digital arm, which are actually taking creative types in, which once was never an ability to get a job within these areas, and you'd probably never unless you've come across them. So these are the kind of things I would encourage you, if you're trying to figure out how can you actually move into this, is looking at some either consulting firms or these different types of ways that you can get into these large corporates, because there is the jobs out there. I know General Assembly does a lot of educational series on this as well. So like if you're interested in that, Emma's a really good person to talk to on this. Just a bit of a plug.
Felicity.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take another question. Lady here at the front.
I was really interested in No Longer King, and it sort of fits in with Felicity's benchmarking by the dollar. Like our business traditions have been that business is measured by dollar, by profitability. And my sense is that there's a change, that collaboration values of business are changing. And I'm interested to sort of investigate Jeremy's cash is no longer king, and there's new exchanges in terms of our licensing and equity, and where that fits into the future of business.
Well, I think I mean, yeah, our business runs off kind of a licensing model, and I think establishing, especially to creative media. Well, I think we went through a kind of a really rough patch for a while in terms of like playing very fast and loose with copyright. But like I'm sure everyone here has a subscription to Spotify or RDO or Netflix even. So like, you know, we are kind of actively taking part in that kind of alternative system, whether we know it or not. So I think it's become a lot easier to engage in that way and a lot easier to kind of support. But even like the whole kind of the more primitive aspect of kind of bartering or trading is something that we're seeing happen in a much more kind of high-tech way. So, I mean, what we spend 7 out of 8 hours a day just negotiating. And it's like this whole kind of, I mean, this is kind of how things were done kind of, you know, hundreds of years ago, and I think it's kind of making this kind of comeback now. And so I think that's kind of something really interesting, and this whole aspect of how to be kind of a good negotiator, something, yeah, that we try to kind of work on a lot to kind of see, well, what are these other people's kind of needs in their kind of business or creative practice, because they might not always be financial, depending on kind of what level that they're on. Like, you know, when you talk especially about building your personal brand, you might need to do something to help you do that, which might not be related to money at all, and we might be able to kind of give that to you, or another person might be able to give that to you. So especially as kind of financial budgets are shrinking, it is opening up those other opportunities, but you need to, I guess, be switched on and mindful of kind of what those opportunities are and what is kind of valuable to you, so you can ask for them properly. So I think knowing what they are is kind of the first step, and then going out and kind of getting them, you know, becomes then a challenge you can actually face.
There's been some very interesting visual arts projects around this, around barter economies and time bank project. I'm thinking visual arts project in Documenta 2013. That's a huge body of research into all these economies like the Ithaca Hours in New York, and I think that's an area where artists are actually doing some very interesting research that will have applications in the commercial sector that are maybe an example of what we're talking about tonight, a little bit of that crossover from sort of aesthetic into research, application into business.
I'm sort of thinking that it's also about knowledge, that one of those valuable things that can happen in those sort of exchanges is sometimes knowledge, and learning is as valuable or more valuable than making a profit on a job, because that's about where you'll be in a couple of years' time, rather than, you know, what the next position is. But I guess I'm also really interested, and I don't think we're there yet, but the concept that art, and in particular, produces knowledge as well as artworks. So if we can kind of make that shift, and that's one of the things that we really work on a lot, is how to take our work and apply it in different areas, then that's a real shift for art. So one of the projects that we have at the moment, for example, is work with one of the bigger engineering research groups at Deakin, the Centre for Intelligent Systems Research, and we've worked together quite closely for some years, and we're working on a system to map people's movement and haptically for people who are blind and vision impaired, so that they can get a sense of what a performance is about. So some of those sorts of things to me are about the knowledge that's in say a dance practice and how you extend that out is really interesting to me. I'm not sure that I have the whole. I'm not sure, as I said, that I don't think we're there yet, but that seems like potentially another way that performing artists particularly can start thinking about what they have to offer, and and to be straightforward making money, because you still need to make money no matter how good you are. If you can't eat, then you can't dance, you can't play.
Yes, and that comes back to the gentleman's question about value and how you express it. I think that's an interesting. We're struggling for language between the sort of arts and the business. I think that is an area that hasn't been nailed at all.
I think we're starting to get there, and I think it's something that we are seeing a shift in. And I think the introduction of things like let's go beyond the arts industry. The introduction of Airbnb and Uber and things like this is this shared economy. So reallocating resources when they're not being used. And this is like a really great thing that the arts industry could do, is how do you reallocate unused resources within this industry so we can have a more efficient way so things cost less to do. And so I think it is a really, it's an interesting time within business, specifically when you're looking, financial outcomes are a means to an end, and I really believe community outcomes are very, very important. But unfortunately, there's always going to be this facet of money within a capitalist society.
So I think we've probably only got time for one more question. Sorry, that came around rather quickly.
Do you mind if I ask a question? Over
George,
here?
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm struggling to see.
I just wanted to touch base on it. It seems to me like we talked about a human sort of connection with technology, and technology is kind of like really blending with us humans, and at some point in time we're probably going to become cyborgs. And that's sort of up, probably far in the distance, but more closely, I was in a room not so long ago, a few weeks ago, where there was a talk about big 5 tech companies pretty much overtaking the landscape and competing with each other. And so the question is, what happens when technology becomes just like a utility bill? And we've kind of used all these exciting things that we're going through now. And so what happens then? And Bruce Sterling, the futurist, said he gives them 10 to 15 years. And let's in 10 to 15 years from now, all this is going to become, let's say, obsolete. Technology is going to be just one thing that used to be exciting. What do we do now? Oh, then. It's kind of a little bit probably hard, but what do we do then?
Can I jump? I think that what I was trying to allude to when I was talking about this is that technology is an enhancement tool, but it's like an infinite set of combinations, isn't it? You can have a light that can turn many different colours, juxtaposed with a few words and some movement and 3 notes in so many ways. That's the thing that I love about what the future holds, because I think it's inexhaustible. I don't think there is a limit on that, and I think that our potential for being awestruck by that sort of stuff is limitless. I would really like to continue to always argue that, that I just think it's limitless, those combinations.
I think that's part of the human condition. We're always creating, we're always thinking of new ways, we're always wanting to become better. So I think that I don't think it will ever be exhaustible, because we're always wanting to be better and be more and have more. It's slightly greedy, but you know, that's the way humans actually define, and that's how we've progressed through society. So I don't know. I don't think we'll exhaust it. It might just turn into something else.
I also think it's a generation. There's an evolution too. I mean, Tame Impala is reworking Black Sabbath, but they're doing it in an evolved way, you know. And there's a whole new bunch of people who've gone, well, I've never seen this in this context. This is unbelievable. I just think that sort of stuff is, it's like new folk music at the moment. Everything's beauty folk music. And I think that's a reflection of people's desire to have that quiet time and contemplate.
you know, and then I think it's going to be 10 years' time. It'll be the Clash. We'll be back with jagged guitars, and but we'll be reworking that and recontextualising it, using better sound systems and different environments within which to appreciate it. I think that's really exciting.
Jeremy, do you want to add anything? Clearly not.
How many fans you'll have to have then?
I don't know. We've been having sex since the beginning of time, and you know, we're still working on that. I think it's so many problems. I think we'll still be in therapy, and we'll still be fixing our machines, and we'll still be arguing and, you know, having conversations like this. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. I think it's always. I think I'm with you. It's always about the use of whatever is available, and it actually, you know, it's never about a specific technology for me. It's always about what more can you do. You know, where can you go? And that the specific technologies may change, and we may come up with something. I guess what that is what we now think of as technology is historical, it's cultural, it's what we think is technology. And that word may go out of fashion, because the look of what we might call it technology now, if we saw it, may completely change, so that it's so seamless that it needs a new word, and it needs a whole new set of sort of concepts around it, and a whole new sets of relationships to it. And I think that's probably inevitable, but also potentially kind of fun.
Yeah, that's a great place to leave. I think the impossible nature of forecasting the future. We'll leave it there. We'll hand over to George for a few words about pause, and meet you in the foyer for a drink.
I just want to thank you all, guys. Thanks, Sophie, Travis, for moderating, and thank the beautiful panel for coming tonight and discussing what's next, the digital futures. I want to thank General Assembly for partnering with us, and all you beautiful people coming to tonight to be with us. I just wanted to kind of get a sense of who are here that is from creative industries. That's great, almost everyone. And who's here from tech? We'll be there. And business? We'll be business. Fantastic. Well, basically, I just wanted to, again, thank you again. Wanted to ask you if it's okay to follow up with an email. We are doing this series of events to lead up to the festival next year, and we would want to give you offer for the festival ticket in the next few weeks. But that's all for me. Let's have a drink and talk more futures. Talk what will happen when robots take our place, and enjoy the night.